Now, if we make those disputable matters a first order, we're going to become sectarian. On the other hand, if we make the first order a disputable matter, we've now compromised the faith once for all entrusted to the saints. And I would say that there's a challenge on falling off either side of the doctrinal horse.
Well, hey, listeners, thanks for jumping on to another episode of Church Chat. This is the podcast where we have conversations about ministry that you wish you were having. This is not your regular leadership podcast. This is a podcast where we get real and talk with real people doing real ministry in the trenches. And I hope this is such a blessing to you. Season 2 of Church Chat is sponsored by Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, lovingly known as TEDS. I'm really excited about this conversation today. My name is Josh Ott. I'm one of your hosts.
And I'm Emily, and today's guest is EFCA Executive Director of Theology and Credentialing. That is a mouthful. He serves on the Board of Ministerial Standing, which we lovingly refer to as BOMS. And he is part of the Spiritual Heritage Committee, so all the good things. Greg Strand, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's a delight to be here with you.
Oh, so glad to have you. Can I tell you, Emily, how I refer to Mr. Greg Strand?
Yes, do.
I don't know if Greg knows this, but I always refer to you, Greg, as the EFCA's theological Yoda.
I've heard it, Josh. You've threatened me with that before.
I have. You are the go-to guy in our tribe for all things theological. I've sat on your teaching quite a bit. I'm ecstatic to just have this conversation and learn some more. And man, just thanks for being on here and taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Yeah,
it's a delight
fun
to join you. I'm looking forward to this. Each week, as often as you do these, you drop them, and I get the mailing, and so I'm part of the EFCA family, and I get the mailings, and I will see, well, who is it this week, or who is it? So I'm aware of your work.
Our audience, Emily, is legit.
I know. We got the theological Yoda.
We got some heavy hitters listening into this. Now, all of a
exciting.
sudden, I feel an enormous amount of pressure.
I know. I already told
right.
you, like this. I feel
All right,
like
Josh.
This conversation is going to be intimidating to me.
Don't mess this one up.
I am not a theology buff, but this is the hilarious guest to have do Two Truths and a Lie. So I'm really excited.
I feel nervous.
I just need to say this, that based upon my role, you asking me to lie, I just want to make sure that all our listeners know I'm asked to lie.
Yep.
All right. I just no misinformation, no disinformation. No. This is part of what we're doing here. So just to make that clear.
Okay.
Yep. Are you ready?
We'll blame it on Emily.
Ready. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Okay. So here they are. I was an all-state basketball player.
Mm-hmm.
I am 100% Norwegian. I was valedictorian in my graduating class.
Oh man. So you nailed it. Here Emily and I get deep into philosophy of two truths and a lie. And this is the hardest kind. The way you did it is the best way. If you're ever doing true truths and a lie, those of you that are listening, this is the best way. Short, succinct, fact, not a lot of adjectives.
Yeah.
Very hard to figure out.
There you are.
I want to say they're all true. But
he could have pulled a fast one on us and be like, beat you at your own game.
And Emily and I are very competitive about this too. And I've won the last two.
Yes, I am kind of in a little bit of a slump right now. So I'm really hoping for a win this round.
It is hard to imagine you as anything but valedictorian.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And I don't know if this is made up, but in my head, I have some sort of conversation about basketball. I'm going to pick first. Is that all right, Emily?
Yeah, I already have what I'm picking in my head. And I'm saying that because I think we're going to pick the same one.
I think the lie is the Norwegian one.
Yeah, that's what I'm going for too.
Okay. So what is it? Yeah.
All state basketball players, true. 100% Norwegian is true.
Dang it.
And by the way, my wife is as well. So we are purebloods and we have papers on our kids. Your pedigree. Actually, they're birth certificates.
Yeah.
And I was not valedictorian in the
That is
graduation.
shocking to
Wow.
me.
I know, me too.
That is, you're the smartest guy I know. So that's shocking. What was that class like? Holy cow.
So
Well, that was thrilling. And my win streak, even though it's a tie,
yeah,
I'm still undefeated in this last couple episodes.
Well, I'm grateful that I could accommodate both of you in sort of spoofing you both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty impressive. Not many people do that. So does that mean that so both of your parents are straight from Norway?
No, but my dad's grandparents were.
Okay.
So my grandpa homesteaded,
Yes. Okay.
but on my wife's side, her grandpa did come over. My grandma did.
Hmm.
My paternal grandmother came from Norway. She came at 18 years of age, speaking only Norwegian. So my dad grew up
Wow.
bilingual, Norwegian and English,
Wow.
and
Wow.
it was the same on my wife's side as well.
That's very cool.
So
We
our ministry, the EFCA, our ministry to all people, it's a different ethnicity. I mean, it's sort of normalized now. There's just so many Europeans that live here. But when my grandmother came, when Karen's grandparents came, it was they didn't speak any
Yeah.
English, none. They looked the same, right? But they didn't speak any English, and culturally it was way different,
Yeah.
and so that's part of our history.
so and you landed in a perfect denomination to be very Norwegian.
Yeah. In fact, it was fun because a year ago there was a conference in Stockholm, Sweden, and someone had heard me talk about our own history, EFCA history from the Nordic countries. It was revival in the Nordic countries that then immigrated here, and that's the foundation of the Free Church. And it was delightful because I was invited back to talk about that history and pray for a renewal and revival again in the Nordic countries. It was really, not only to give thanks to God for what He did in these Nordic countries, but now that to pray that God would do it again.
Yeah.
And it was in fact, it was about a year ago in which I did that, and it was delightful to be there.
Oh, I digress. But Norway is the birthplace of one of my favorite Premier League football players. So I'm a fan.
Who's that?
Awesome.
It's
Who's that?
Martin Odegaard.
Nice.
That's a
Mhm.
good Norwegian name.
Yes, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. I'm sure there's a much better way to pronounce that, but let's dive in. We're getting all theologically nerdy today, and I'm really excited about it. So the EFCA has this kind of great distinctive in essentials unity and non-essentials charity in all things Jesus Christ. So I feel like this is probably a good place to start for our topic of theology. Why do you think that distinctive is so important for today's church? And how do you see
Uh,
that playing out practically for us?
Yeah, I think it's critical, honestly. Let me just say a word about the history.
Mm.
Hmm.
It was actually uttered initially by Rupertus Meldenius in the 17th century during the 30 Years' War in Germany, 1618, 1648, 30 Years' War. And the 30 Years' War was a religious civil war.
Huh.
And Rupertus Meldenius made this statement, as you just mentioned, Emily. And so it was not a matter of diminishing or being minimalist in our theological beliefs, such that we affirm that we believe nothing. That was not the case. The case was that what does it mean when we affirm Jesus Christ as supreme and as central, and then how do we live that out? And so, that history, I think, is important. It was popularized by a Puritan known as Richard Baxter. That's a name that you might have heard. So the Free Church picked up, and not just the Free Church, others as well, but picked up this motto, and it's majoring on majors, minoring on minors. It's
Mm.
focusing on the essentials of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mean, it's in our name. We are evangelical. We are evangel, the evangelion, the gospel, and it's the gospel that unites, not just doctrinally, but it's the gospel that then unites relationally.
Mm.
And so it's both doctrinal purity that we are committed to, which we affirm, but it's also relational unity. And it's the gospel purity that actually creates the relational unity. Because without the gospel giving us a new heart and creating that one new humanity, there won't be relational unity. And today, if I may, one of the discouraging things is that often the gospel we preach is not manifested in the way we love one another. And it seems to me that this very statement that the gospel is, at least in manifestation, at least in the way it's being lived out, calls into question the gospel that we proclaim, that is truth, and it creates the one new humanity. So I think it's absolutely critical for us to remember. In fact, we did a doctrinal survey about a year ago, and this statement, it's referred to as, to some degree, the significance of silence. We affirm essentials. It's still a high value in the EFCA. Those that the survey respondents still value it. It's one of the, I think, the uniquenesses, one of the unique distinctions of the EFCA. So it's encouraging to me. I think it's a good motto, a good statement that is grounded biblically and guided theologically.
Yeah, that's very encouraging that would be something that, in that survey is coming back, where people are still really, I love that part of the EFCA. It helps me, I think, practically speaking, pastoring a church, it helps me just really stay focused and keep things in the proper place, keep Jesus in the center of all of it. Do you ever think that, I don't know, you have a pretty broad scope of churches. You interact with a lot of pastors from very diverse backgrounds on a national scale. Is there anywhere that this is sort of being tested, this kind of distinctive is being tested for the guys on the ground these days?
Everywhere.
Okay.
It's just, honestly, I mean, it's the time in which we live. And I don't mean to make light of it at all, because I mean, there are, we're living in a day in which there's divisions, and there's sifting and sorting, and there's polarization, and it's sad to me. And so, honestly, Josh, this is being tested and tried virtually everywhere. And we're not alone. As a denomination, we're not alone. I mean, most local churches, and in fact, it even embeds into families, where our understanding of, and it's not for most evangelicals, there's agreement doctrinally, there's agreement on biblical doctrine, but there's a huge difference in how we understand cultural engagement and the church and the state and political ideology and etc. And that's where the sifting and the sorting and the debates and the divisions are happening. And I'm seeing it everywhere is too strong, but I'm seeing it. There are few, if any, that are unaffected by what we've just discussed.
Yeah. That it's hard to pastor in the middle of that sometimes, with all the pulling and the pushing. What's a piece of advice that you would give, maybe just something practical to a pastor or somebody in ministry that is really feeling the tension of that and the pull, and they're in the middle of some of the more divisive conversations?
Yeah, I thought a long and hard about that very issue. In the midst of the some would call it the six-way fracturing. It's an article you've probably read. It published about 2 years ago, and some nuancing of that. But as I've considered this and some of the differences, in fact, I just did this last Monday at a district conference. So it's pretty fresh in one of our free church districts, and after teaching about these things, I gave 7 suggestions of how to reply. First, pray with and for those who differ or disagree or dissent. It's easy to treat them as an enemy. They anyone who differs on church and state, on cultural engagement and political ideology, we consider them an existential threat to our very being, and they feel the same the other way.
Yeah.
And And so, it's pray with and for those who differ or disagree and dissent. Secondly, love God and love others. And remember, love covers a multitude of sins. And you know what? Not just theirs, but yours. Fine.
Yeah.
Third, approach others as brothers and sisters, not as enemies, assuming the best. I think sometimes, often today, we're assuming the worst, aren't we?
Yeah.
Fourth, engage in personal conversation relationally. That is, don't jump on social media to make your point, or to get even, or to score points, or whatever the case might be. Five, listen, learn, and lead with humility, which, dear friends, is a mark of the gospel. Six, preach, teach, instruct, catechize, disciple with courage, which is also a mark of the gospel. Humble courage. Convictional kindness is the word I use. And then honestly, my thought, as hard as this is, if and when necessary, bless those sifting and sorting, and pray for them as they find a new church family. Sometimes I think staying is just going to cause some division and hurt and pain. And as hard as it is, not every church is the right local church for everybody.
Right.
We just acknowledge that. We await the new heavens and the new earth, right? When it'll be fulfilled, right? But until then, there are different families, and I don't want people to leave wrongly, but I do want then appropriately to help people leave well. So those are some of the encouragements that I have shared with pastors and leaders in churches over the last several months.
Those are incredible. And right now, we have a ton of listeners rewinding the last 3 minutes to lock those in. And I'm so thankful.
Yeah, or they're squirming.
I just love, Greg, the way you word sentences to capture exactly what you want to say. Like pray with and for. So both of those things, so beautiful and so scary at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's almost easier to pray for somebody. And that's difficult too when when there's tension and
it is.
But wow, if I'm really convicted by that first one out of the gate. Like I pray with too, not just pray for. Sit down, pray with.
Do you remember Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Life Together?
Yeah.
He said, when praying for someone who you would consider an enemy, or you have some disagreements, when praying for them, that face becomes a friend. In other, and that's not his exact language, but his point is, when you pray for them, with them, it changes your posture. It's as if God the Holy Spirit does something unique in your own heart, in your own perspective. And so an enemy is no longer seen as an enemy, but as a brother, as a sister. And I think it's important for us to remember those things.
Yeah.
So I am thinking through obviously how that applies to me personally, but I think it's a unique challenge for a denomination in particular, because obviously there are like autonomous churches, leaders who work at more non-denominational who listen to this, but because we're all in the EFCA, whether work or church-wise, I'm going to be asking this question from that perspective. But I mean, I kind of view convictions more in a personal realm, like their personal convictions. But there seems like there would need to be some sort of corporate convictions for denomination like EFCA. So how do we model that?
Yeah.
But also, I guess you can answer that question first, because I feel like, I mean, we've had to, like, you guys, part of BOMS and stuff, I don't know, I'm sure there's like a proper term for this, but you have the ability to exercise church discipline on people who have completely gone off the deep end or are not aligning with at least our statement of faith or whatever. I don't know what the guidelines are for that, but like, it's weird because the distinctive is fairly, there's a lot of freedom in it, but then there also needs to be guardrails. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, and that is a good way. Theological or doctrinal guardrails is a good way to refer to that. There are several ways. I think convictions are not just personal, but they're also corporate. And so, when you think about a creed or a confession, a creed is we believe. So it's a corporate confession. And even if one were to say, or if we corporately say we are corporately with a singular voice speaking with one voice. And so convictions are individual and personal, but they're also corporate. And this is then the title of the book, right? Evangelical Convictions, which is a theological exposition of our statement of faith of the EFCA. Yeah. So even there, we are acknowledging convictions, and we would say the same thing, historically. So we affirm the authority, the inerrancy and the authority of the Bible. We affirm the Nicene Creed of the 4th century. We affirm the Chalcedonian Confession of the 5th century, etc. So these are convictions that are creedal, and they are embedded historically in the church. So when you think about church history, it's been part of the history of the church as we've expressed our faith once for all entrusted to the saints. So then how do we think about this? Well, in many ways, Emily, it would be pondering theological or doctrinal rank or theological triage, as some have referred to that term. That is, when you think about Paul, he would say in 1 Corinthians 15, 1-5, that he's preached the gospel, and the gospel which is of first importance, namely Jesus died, buried, rose again, right? And we're witnesses of these things. That's a first order doctrine. We don't equivocate on that. There's no. That's not just the distinctive. That is a dividing line, right? And yet, on the other hand, Paul would say in Romans 14:1, now, brothers and sisters, he would say about disputable matters, don't divide. In other words, what he's saying here now are those issues that ought not to be causes for division. Extend grace and charity with one another. Now, if we make those disputable matters a first order, we're going to become sectarian. On the other hand, if we make the first order a disputable matter, we've now compromised the faith once for all entrusted to the saints. And I would say that there's a challenge on falling off either side of the doctrinal horse. That is, on the one side, what I'm calling is a neo-fundamentalism of narrowing, claiming everything as an absolute truth. But on the other side, what I call progressive evangelicalism or theological liberalism, it's claiming that as if nothing's of a first order doctrine of importance. And so it's those poles that have biblical grounding, that is first order and disputable matters. And between these two poles, there is also a second and a third order doctrines as well. And Lord willing, we'll be publishing this book entitled Evangelical Unity, Debating Without Dividing, Lord willing, in the next year, 18 months. I just need some time. So Josh and Emily, if you can find some time for me to do that, yeah. I will gladly take it. But that's, Emily, exactly what we're trying to spell out, to recognize, there are some fundamental doctrines we cannot equivocate or deviate on without compromising the faith. And yet there are other things that are more the disputable matters that we need to recognize them as disputable matters. And if we then make them more than that, we become sectarian or syncretistic. In other words, we have the Christian faith, the faith once for all entrusted to the saints, but we're adding other things to it, as if it's the Christian faith. I think a unique challenge in that front right now with some is that the Christian faith, a political ideology has been added to it. And I'm not saying one way or another. I'm not saying one way or another.
All goes both ways.
Political ideology has been added to it, so it's become syncretistic. It's become other than the pure, unadulterated gospel of Jesus Christ.
So is that the heart behind what you just said? Is that what prompted those affirmations and denials that the EFCA put out?
Several things. Thank you for asking about that. We have been asked, and it's not unusual. Churches have been asked, pastors have been asked, elders have been asked, others have been asked. So is this what you believe? And in many ways, it's. And I don't know if it's ever happened with you or any of those listening, but you're asked a question, and you're not asked a question. It's a statement. It's a claim
Yeah.
being made. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so there are questions being asked, but it's really technically the person is not asking a question, but wanting to
Yeah.
make a point.
Yep.
Well, this is what happened. This was our experience. And, I in my role, I get a lot of emails, a lot of questions, and I'm delighted to do it. It's a privilege. I just want you to know that I find it a unique privilege to be able to serve in this way. But it's just, we were asked a lot of questions, but they were really statements. Actually, what happened was we decided to say, why don't we to respond that, we're not this, but we are that. Because
Yeah.
in essence, what people wanted to do was to pigeonhole, at least some. They wanted to pigeonhole. Some were honestly asking, so where do we stand, right? Where do we
Right.
stand on these matters? Some are really looking to pigeonhole, and really, although we as evangelicals we repudiate cancel culture out there, I fear, dear brother and sister, that we engage in cancel culture just as much. And
Oh,
if we don't agree all the way down, even with disputable matters, and as I've said,
Mhm.
whether it's political ideology, whether it's cultural engagement, whether it's church and state, etc., that often we are pretty quick to cancel, and it just anyway. That's a tangential, but it is part of it. So what we did then. If you've looked at statements of affirmations and denials, normally it'll start with an affirmation and then follow with a denial. You'll notice this one didn't. This declaration, where we stand in the EFCA, begins with denials because, in essence, it's a response to the claims and accusations and criticisms and condemnations that were made, and then it follows with an affirmation. We're not this. We don't believe this, but we do this. And that was the origin of it. And honestly, I think in the kindness of God, it's been received very strongly, very well, and it's been an encouragement. I think it's brought clarity. I think it's brought a great deal of clarity to the EFCA, and I think it's been helpful and an encouragement to many.
So, do you view, or does the EFCA view this document as more of a like internal document? Because I'm just thinking like, okay, I'm processing out loud here, so you can call me out on any of this if it does not ring true. But it just seems like for the average person or churchgoer, like they're not necessarily processing all the things about EFCA as a denomination. Like they're just going to their own church and they either fully agree with what their own church believes, functions, their own statement of faith. Because, like, obviously, many of our churches adopt the full EFCA statement of faith. Some people tweak
They
it
all
or,
have to, Emily. Hang on, they all have to, or they
okay,
couldn't
yeah.
be a free
Yeah.
church.
There's
okay,
no,
okay, okay.
Yep.
Thank you for catching me on that. But
Yeah.
I feel like, but those are fairly, those 10 things, they're, yes, are essentials, but then there's lots of other,
Mhm.
things that could be taught from the pulpit that still like fall into those, but are part of those conviction areas or whatever. So, like for the average churchgoer, if they felt like their church was woke or whatever, they're going to opt out,
Mhm.
regardless of what the big EFCA thinks. So, do you like? So I'm
I
just
could, I think I know what you're saying.
thank you.
And I
Can you
think
distill it a
so.
little bit better than me?
Well, I don't know about that. I think it is super helpful on the ground in churches, even though you have, there, it's less and less people who are just, not caring about it. I think there's more people these days who are kind of tuned into these kind of conversations. But I will say, like, the affirmations denial document is super helpful, pastoring church, because when we get those questions or comments, which happens regularly in this season of ministry that we're in, we have something bigger than just us to point to say, this is where I stand, but
Mhm.
also this is where I'm not
Mhm.
just a pastor with one opinion that maybe your politics don't agree with. This is where the denomination stands. And so it was very affirming to, I
Yeah,
think, pastors.
it was.
And it was very almost like a tool that you guys handed to the churches to say, here we are, this is who we are.
Mhm.
We're going to, whether you like it or not, we're dousing this thing with a bunch of clarity. And then that becomes a much easier way. It's like Greg said, there's people who genuinely ask, and then there's people who are trying to pigeonhole you. I think affirmations and denials document, or denial and affirmation, I love the way it's flipped, is an easy way to say, this is where we are, this is where I am, this is where our denomination is. I'd love to have a conversation with you. Why don't you check this out, read it, and then we'll start, then we'll set up a time to have a conversation. And what that does, I think, practically speaking, is it eliminates, I don't want to say, is it ever a waste of time to talk to somebody who disagrees with you? I don't know.
I think it is sometimes.
I would say it can become that. I wouldn't begin there, but it can
Right,
become that.
right. But it kind of does, like, weeding is the wrong term here, but it kind of like helps you focus on the conversations that are actually going to be conversations, because usually those who are just trying to pigeonhole you, it ends with, oh, okay, that's where you stand.
Yeah.
You summarized that really well. Okay, because we have had experience with people that I will not name names, but who have rabble roused, and yeah, we'd have to cut that out. But I think it's the point of like that. These affirmations and denials only matter if it's not just lip service. And the way it's not just lip service is if your denomination reflects this. And if somebody from the outside could not tell that. Like, obviously there's outliers. So like, why I'm all for clarity, but what's the, if the average person couldn't tell that we weren't woke, that we weren't pro whatever, that seems to be more of an issue than creating a document.
I would say multiple things to that.
Okay.
Some of that is there'll be several things I'll address. One is that as an association of churches, even as Josh mentioned, each local church and the pastors of those churches, the elders, leaders of those churches, they're not alone. They're not just autonomous. They're part of an association of churches. And honestly, in my role and in our role as a denomination, in actually the role of EFCA East as a district in a denomination, our task is to help pastors and elders and leaders and churches to think about these things, so that, as Josh mentioned, this is not just Josh's opinion. This is not just my bully pulpit, or whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
This is part of an association of churches, a statement that has come out as an association of churches. Now, I would say most everybody, Emily, is thinking about these things that attend church anyway. Everyone is thinking about these things at some level, in some way, because you can't, I mean, it's the air we're breathing, isn't it? I mean, all of these different things. And so they come with some idea or some notion or some influence one way or another. And for us, it's not necessarily a top down as much as a bottom up. That is to say, for the local church attender or church member, it's going to be dependent upon the pastor and the elders and the leaders to determine how much of that is communicated. And, I often will say this, that the free church has some of the best unknown material available.
Yes.
And you get what I mean?
Yeah, it really does.
Let me say one other thing. Is this just an internal? Well, you know what? Even if it is, I'm okay with it being a family document, a family covenant, a family declaration, whatever the case might be. Recently, you may have read, if not, you might want to put it in the show notes. But Trevin Wax wrote an article entitled "The EFCA on Learning to Say Yes and No," and he's commenting. So you saw it, yeah. And he's commenting on where we stand in the EFCA, denials and affirmations. And, it was kind of him to pick it up and to comment on it affirmingly, as he did, just as an exemplar model. We did not do it for someone else to observe it or to comment or critique it or affirm it one way or another. we really did it for our own family, for the clarity and for helpfulness. The other thing I would say is this, that this is who the Free Church is in the main. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to agree with everything
Right.
down the line. They are still within acceptable boundaries.
Yeah.
And we're glad you're with us. But this is who
Yeah.
we are in the main. And for that reason, it brought clarity. Now, I would say this, that as a result of some of the document and the biblical theological commentary that followed, I don't know if you're familiar with that commentary that followed.
Mhm.
It's about a 9,000 word
Yep.
commentary that I think is also helpful. But it's been used in significant ways that I think it's been helpful for people. I, in fact, taught a Sunday school class on each of the 8 bullets. So I've got about 100 pages of teaching notes on the 8 bulleted items on the denials and affirmations. So I think it's been helpful. The other thing I was going to say is, in light of some of the clarification, it has resulted in many from outside the EFCA churches indicating an interest to become part of the EFCA. If this, especially with some of the questions and debates that are happening among evangelicalism, but there are also some in the EFCA that have said, you know what, I don't think we fit.
Mm-hmm.
And in those instances, this is the remember the 7th point that I talked about local churches. If and when necessary, bless those who sift and sort, and they're brothers and sisters. But it's a different expression of our family, and we're okay with that.
Yes. I mean, and we had some of those in the EFCA East, and I'm so grateful. Like, they handled it really well, and we love them, and God bless you on the way. I think it just frustrates me when you have the opposite of you clearly don't agree, and now you're digging your heels in and being a turd because you just, I don't know. I just don't get that. I'm sorry. Might cut that out, but I just don't understand.
Wonderful. I think that should go in the open.
Because you clearly know where we stand, but you're choosing to
those are outliers, though.
They are. They are.
You're
but
talking
they cause
about
issues.
They can, but I think the EFCA has gotten much better. Well, I shouldn't even say much better. Maybe they've always been good at it. I think I just haven't, been looking that long. I think they're good at handling those kind of situations. And you're talking about a very large organization and very spread out and all kinds of diversity in our organization. And then you got a handful, maybe that are digging in and disagreeing. And that's part of one of the trade-offs. Great. Maybe you could talk about this a little bit. There's a beauty and, I don't know if danger is the right word, to having the autonomy that we have in our denomination. But that doesn't mean that the beauty isn't worth, it's worth it to have what we have and the way our denomination is set up, even if it allows for some of those outliers to dig in and do whatever.
I would say this, that we, as evangelicals grounded in the gospel, and I often say is we are tethered to the text of Scripture and we are grounded in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And what that means is that we believe that the doctrinal purity, relational unity, we don't create it. God did by sending his son. You think of the high priestly prayer, John 17, that Jesus prayed for the oneness, right? Jesus prayed for the oneness. He not only prayed for the oneness, he died to create the oneness. And we read about that then in Ephesians 2:14-16, right? That out of the two, God has made one new humanity through the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus Christ. That is his work. But in Ephesians 4, we're exhorted to humility and to eagerly work towards, desire, labor for the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And we truly believe that the gospel we affirm and preach and proclaim, that has, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, it is the power of God, Romans 1:16, right? We believe that. We preach that. but we also live it. We live in a manner worthy of the gospel, Paul says in Philippians 1. And it's why in Galatians 2, he will confront Peter to his face, because Peter is living inconsistently. He pulls away from table fellowship. Come on, it's just table fellowship. It's just a meal. No, at the heart of his pulling away was a doctrinal issue. It was a gospel issue. The gospel created one new humanity. It did not create division. And this is then, we are to eagerly work toward the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So yes, Josh, we believe it's worthwhile because Jesus died and rose and is seated, and we believe it's worthwhile to be committed to that and to attempt to live it out as imperfectly as we do.
We'll be right back. Hey everybody, you guys know this podcast is sponsored by Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. Emily, we are stoked about TEDs. They are offering such incredible stuff. And what I was surprised, maybe you were surprised too, is that this stuff is accessible, it's affordable, and what we have to tell our audience today is free. How cool is that? Like theological training at the highest level, free, thanks to all of Ted's efforts at the Henry Center.
I really am excited about this because I didn't take a whole lot of Bible classes when I was in college, and I'm not necessarily interested in like getting an MDiv or anything, but I love to learn from super smart people, and this is your way to do it without committing to anything intense. Going to these lectures from my living room.
Yeah, from your living room, or you can attend in person if you want. That's how they're packaging. Listen, they're all about just giving us value and helping real people involved with real ministry on the ground running. So yeah, no matter where you are in the world, these are valuable lectures you can be a part of. Just go to the links we'll provide in here to register. Registration is free. Wherever you are, these lectures are so easy for you to be a part of. If you're in the Chicagoland area, you can attend in person in a great atmosphere at the TEDS campus. If you're not, you can register and be a part of the live stream online. In either case, register for these incredible lectures. They are going to be top notch and they're free. Don't miss out on it. For more information, you can always jump to teds.edu/churchchat. Back to our episode. I have been dying to get to this question. It's kind of taking it in a different lane now. Is everybody okay? Is everybody okay?
Yes, I'm done with my rant now.
Okay. So, when we're talking about a lot of theology stuff, and do you see any area that the church or its leaders really could use a strengthening of our theology?
Yeah,
if you had to pick one to say this is something you should dig in.
Yeah, there are several. So you've limited me, brother.
You could list them all. I'd love to hear all of them.
You've heard me long enough in this podcast so far that you're saying one.
No, I'd love to hear all of them, actually.
Well, let me compare contrast.
Okay.
Some of your listeners will remember that in 1966, Time. Now, I don't typically look for Time magazine to be a good commentary on the Bible, but it does. But I do look at it as a commentary on culture.
Yeah.
1966, cover of Time magazine, April 1966. Is God dead? I don't know if you've ever reading about that or hearing about that.
I've seen that cover. I mean, I was not born yet. I want that to be clear to all our listeners.
Yeah.
But I've seen that cover.
I was young. So let me just say that.
There you go. Good.
But so is God dead? That is a perpetual issue that we need to wrestle with as a people of God. But there's a second. It came out 2017, cover of Time magazine. Is truth dead? Now you think about this in the midst of this. So 1966, is God dead? 2017, is truth dead? I think you go back to Genesis 3 and the fall. It's been a perpetual issue that we need to address every generation. God and his truth, God and his word. So the cultural commentary is I don't want to say it's a wake-up call, but it says something to us that we can't assume. We must not assume. Again, there are several. Let me just mention one. I think if you were to ask 10 pastors, 10 theologians today, What is the major issue? I think they would say it's theological anthropology. That is, what is a human being? Who is a human being according to what God has said? Now, I've looked at it this way. If you're to summarize the first millennium of the church, what would be the major doctrinal issue of the first millennium that the church faced? I would say it's Christology. Who is Christ? In the second millennium, now we're talking, the 1000 to 2000, what was the major doctrinal issue the church addressed? I would say it's salvation. That is, think of the Reformation. Today, in the first 24 years of the third millennium, I think it's who is a human being? Who are those created in the image of God? Male, female, theological anthropology. What does that mean? And I think by and large, we have not had to address it because there's been sort of agreement. And so I think it's something that the church needs to take seriously to begin instructing families, parents, children on what it means to be created in the image of God with dignity and worth, and what it means to be created male and female. If I could be personal, not as if I haven't been, but when Karen and I, my wife and I, first conceived our first child, we began praying through the development of the biological and physiological and all of the different parts that are developing from conception, right? And week one, and the hearts and the eyes and the lungs and all of these things, because prayer matters. And God asked us, so we prayed. And so when we give birth, that we've prayed for this child even before conception, but right? And so we prayed for all of these things. And mostly we prayed that he would have ears to hear God's word and a heart to move towards God, etc. Well, when we first learned that our oldest was, they had conceived, my son and his wife, and they found out that he was a boy, we began praying. And we have 8 grandchildren, by the way. And we began praying all those things. And we've done it for all of our grandchildren. The same thing that we prayed for our children. But we added one thing. And that is, when we found out that our first grandchild was a grandson, we began praying that he would be joyfully satisfied in being male, a biologically sexed male, and who would become a man after God's own heart. And when we learned our second grandchild was a granddaughter, we prayed all the same things, but we prayed, dear God, might she become a woman after your own heart and be joyfully satisfied in being a biologically sexed female. And these are things, friends, that I think that during our dedication services, this is part of the instruction that I think could be helpful to remind God's people who we are, created in the image of God as male and female. That's very good. By the way, I wrote a dedication service reflecting these very things that I'm mentioning, because I think it's an important instructional tool for the people of God.
Since you brought up the next generation, how do you feel like this next generation of believers and church leaders are engaged with theology?
I actually think that many, since we're talking our free church family, I think many in our free church family are pretty significantly engaged. And I think there's some reasons for that. I think there are ebbs and flows. I'm just thinking of the last maybe 30 or 40 years. There's and this is just sort of observational comments. Okay, so it's good, bad, whatever. But there's the emergent church that came about, and then there's the seeker sensitive movement and of the seeker driven churches, and so there's some of that, and then there's the missional church, and what does that mean, and how does that factor in, and I think we're at a time, whether it's music, that so much of the music today is biblically grounded and theologically rich, from many that we're singing, whether it's Getty's or City of Light or other things as well. I'm finding that the younger generation is eager and longing for that. Now, not just information for the sake of information, but information for the purpose and sake of transformation. That is, it has an impact on how we live and how we love others. And so I'm honestly finding it to be quite encouraging. And since we're talking about the free church, at least in the free church, I'm finding it somewhat encouraging, very encouraging, actually. And is that true universally? No, it's not true universally. Are there those that are deconverting and deconstructing? Yeah, there are those. Now, I could say a word about that too. And I think sometimes that term is not understood well. And I could talk a whole lot about deconstructionism, which I won't. But I would say this: sometimes I think, deconstructing the faith is, the New Testament, it's called apostasy, and there is a category. So it ought not to surprise us or shock us, right? And there are a variety of reasons for that. But I think often it's used today in the sense of, I'm rethinking the faith that I was taught when I was growing up, and the language used is, I'm deconstructing. Well, you're actually, that's part of sanctification. I mean, that's part of that's part of the growing process. So I'm not going to quibble about the term used. So if someone says, well, I'm deconstructing, here's what I'm going to say: tell me what you mean by that. What's your experience? Tell me what you mean by that, and let's talk about that. And often what I find, they're not actually deconstructing, they're just rethinking what they were taught growing up. And you know what? We ought to celebrate that. We ought to help them, because every one of us as parents, we're going to impart the faith once for all entrusted to the saints, but also a specific application of that. So we are Christians in my family, but we're also strands. And you know what? Sometimes the strands gets globbed onto the Christian. And as my children grow, you know what? I want them to sort of sever the strand. You understand what I'm saying? Take away the application of the specific strand family and make it your own. I mean, all of us have to live the biblical truth. We're not, no exception.
Right.
But the specific way in which we live that out, the application, I don't want to absolutize or universalize that. The truth I do, but the application, you know what? That's going to be varied. So just an example: when I travel, I do not turn the television on in my hotel room. I don't. I don't trust myself. I love God. I love my wife. I love my family. I mean, all of these things. I don't want to be tempted. So I don't. And you know what? It's for me, it's a means of living out the truth of be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Whether it's Leviticus 11:44, or whether it's 1 Peter 1:16, etc. Who's exempt from that command to be holy? Nobody. No Christian at all. But how many are mandated not to turn the television on in the hotel room?
Yeah. I'm
not mandating that. You see what I'm saying? I'm not mandating that. But no one is exempt from living it up. So I think sometimes it's not a deconstructing. It's the term used is disenculturation. And so it's recognizing some of those things in which I was raised. And you know what? As parents, we do what we believe is right before God for the well-being of our children, don't we? But it's wheat and tares. We just have to confess, right? And so it's a matter of trying to live that out. And so I'm encouraged, actually, in many ways, for where the next generation is.
That is such a helpful framing of that. I love that whole conversation. And this is a huge topic. People are really concerned about it. I got asked to do a breakout on the topic last year at a conference, and people in tears afterwards talking to me about their son or somebody they care about, and the fear. Are they leaving the faith? And am I losing my kid? That's such a helpful. That is such a helpful framing of this. Hey, you can lose the strand part. Like that's okay. You can lose the ought part. To keep the Jesus part. And
we can't be threatened by that. I think sometimes we as parents, we are so concerned or threatened by the fact that not everything we did was helpful or healthy. Well, let's just acknowledge it. And by the way, repentance is a mark of the gospel. It's God's kindness that leads us to repentance. And you know what? I don't think there are any of us that do not have some things for which we can say, I'm sorry. And for my wife and me, we have prayed regularly for several years, many years, even when our kids were at home. that our children would learn earlier than us, and they would do, by God's grace, better than us in their own marriages and in their own families.
That's such a good perspective and a
really
great
is.
prayer. That was like, I feel so, I mean, you've dropped a whole lot of gold on us, but that one, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be sending this podcast to a lot of people to listen to. Thank you for that, Greg.
Yeah.
Seriously, that was great.
I have a good one. Well, I want to know this from you personally.
Pump yourself up. Why don't you? What does that mean? Your questions are better than my question?
No, I was just thinking, I really want to know the answer to this.
Okay.
Your job keeps you very steeped in theology, very heady, bookish, knowledge-based things. Maybe you do this naturally, but is it just a posture that you have or some habits to make sure that those that you're not living up in your head, but that you're it's an outpouring, that there is fruit from all of that knowledge?
Yeah, you'd have to ask those that live around me, how well that's lived out. True theology is lived, and it's both head and heart. I will often use the expression convictional kindness, that in which we will affirm orthodoxy, a term you've heard, that is right beliefs. And then I use the term orthopraxy, that is the right practice. And all of that is grounded, what I would say, in orthocardia. Cardiologist, it's a heart. That is, we're given a new heart that enables us then to live a certain way. And that then also results in orthopathy, the pathos, that we rejoice with those who rejoice and we weep with those who weep. And that's not a natural, that's a supernatural thing. And I think of Paul in 1 Corinthians 8:1, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. And truth and doctrine, it should never be an end in itself. It misses the intent. I think that one of the issues of I refer to discipleship 2.0. Discipleship 1.0, I'm limiting the time frame, so just know that. But when I was growing up in 70s, 80s, 90s even, discipleship was information. So you'd memorize scripture, which is always good, but it was sort of an end in itself, and it was memorizing scripture verses, and it was an atomization. What I mean by that is a scripture verse here, a scripture verse there, apart from the overarching story of the Bible. But it was more informational. But at the end of the day, we are renewed by the transformation of our mind. That is, it is knowledge, but it's 2 Corinthians 3:18. The Holy Spirit is conforming us into the image of Christ from one shade or form of glory into another. And so it's information that leads toward transformation, with the purpose of transformation. It's never knowledge. Information is never to be an end in itself. It is always to lead to worship of God. So, what I often say is the ground of doxology, that is worship, is theology, and the fruit of theology is doxology. And they are not what God has joined together. Let not any human being put asunder.
Yeah.
So I do it imperfectly, Emily. It's a great question. I do it imperfectly, but that's my goal, my desire, and my prayer.
I love that.
I definitely, I'm not as close to you as your family, obviously, but I definitely see your heart and how you interact with people and the conversations you have after you present with people. And I'm so thankful that you are where you are in the position you are. It's a blessing to us and to our denomination. And having a theologian with such a heart for people and for the church is such a blessing. So thank you for that. I know,
well, by God's grace,
that may make you uncomfortable, but
by God's grace.
Yeah.
What do we have that we did not receive?
Right.
Okay. My follow-up question is going to be dumb because of what I just asked you about not letting knowledge, be the main thing, but I'm sure you read quite a bit and you read lots of things. Do you have any favorite books, whether they're more theology?
The Bible. I mean, what do you say? What do you say, Emily?
Okay.
I mean, if only, I wish, in fact, I should probably take a picture. If you can include a picture, I've got, let me count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got 6 different rooms at the national office with books.
I love it.
If that says anything. And so, I'm looking at here. You can see some behind me as well. It's so hard, and some of that is dependent upon seasons of life. Some of it's dependent upon what issues you're studying,
Right.
what you're preaching, what you're preparing for, what you're going through in life, or what someone else is asking you questions about. One of the things that I used to do when I was a pastor, I still do it now today with some pastors as well. But when I would get questions, and part of it is, it's just sort of a posture and demeanor. You invite questions and you get them, and I would often communicate or respond to the question, and then I would share the question without the response to elders or leaders in training that I did a 2-year leadership training with when I pastored, and at the end of that 2-year training, those people that went through the training could have been credentialed. But I was training in doing the 2-year plan and program, and just all the book. But then what I would do is I would send the elders with whom I served the question and say, give me a response, and I want it to be biblical, theological, and historical if you can. And this would force them to think about the issues that God's people in the church are asking. And because they're elders, they would typically know the person. If the person if it was a confidential matter, I'd take out the name, right?
Yeah.
And then I would follow with my response, not as if it was the definitive response, but it became a means of helping them to know how to think and ponder and process things biblically and theologically. I still do that. I still do that with younger pastors. And so to help them to think, to have a mindset that thinks their initial impulse is as a biblical thought and theological processing. And it's proven to be helpful for many.
I like that.
This was such a good blessing of a conversation. So many good takeaways. I took 4 pages of notes in my little booklet. We don't so I'm just processing all of this information. You're laughing at me.
I am, because you were gonna go to our outro, and
listen,
we gotta go.
We're not at the outro yet.
No, we're not.
You threw me off when you said the word turd while we're talking to the theological Yoda of the EFCA.
I'm sorry. I could have used stronger language, but I thought turd was better.
Well, all that to say, I was raised on a farm, and our Saturday mornings were spent cleaning the barn.
Oh,
see, there you go. He's very familiar with turds.
Manure.
Yeah, I have to do that too. Still today, we have horses. So we kind of end with one last question. Usually, Emmy, you usually pitch this last one.
I know.
But somehow
okay.
I'm pitching the last question.
Go for it. I'm really into this.
I'm gonna drop the ball. I'm gonna fumble this. All right. So we end with just, what are you loving right now? It doesn't have to be anything necessarily spiritual. It can be. Everything's on the table. Who wants to go first?
I feel like Greg should, because he was really excited at the beginning to share it.
Okay, so I would correct just a little bit that it doesn't have to be spiritual, but you just need to know, for me, everything is spiritual. So you knew that you were testing me. I know it. I'm trusting Josh that I passed.
You did.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the test. Thank you for the test.
Oh my gosh.
Actually, there are a couple of things, and let me just begin broader. And I'm so thankful for the privilege of doing what I do. It is a unique privilege. Not all denominations have a person, a role that I'm serving in, and I do find it just a joy and a privilege to serve in this way. And I do truly see it in that way. I can hardly wait to get up in the morning to come to address matters of ministry and theology, doctrine, people each day. And so I, that's just a joy. The other thing I would say is, my wife and I are in our 41st year of marriage, and we are more in love today than we were 41 years ago. And that I'm grateful for that. We're grateful to the Lord. Brings happiness to see adult children raising their own families now, and it's just a joy and a privilege. 3 John 4. John writes, I have no greater joy than this, to see that my children walk in truth. And I know he's speaking spiritually, but my own biological children and their spouses are also not just biological and spouses, but also spiritually. And that brings great joy. And I will end with my 8 grandchildren. I just find great delight in being a grandpa, a privilege of passing the faith to the next generation. And both Karen and I just are delighted for this season of life to be able to love and care for and impart the faith, not in a parental way at all, but in a grandparental way. And it's a joy.
That's so good.
Awesome. Do you want to
Well,
go?
I'll go next. I'm loving right now. So we have just gone through a pretty incredible church merger / in the middle of a process of moving to a bigger building. So I'm actually sitting in my new office in that building, and I've just, I'm taking a more intentional approach to limit clutter so that I can, focus a little bit more, lock it in a little bit more. So I'm doing like this kind of like minimalistic approach to my office, and it's just been very, very nice and freeing, and I really am liking it. So
that's great. I'll come and take a look in a year.
Yeah, we'll see if we make it. I'm also, it's exciting. I'm going to get to see you, Greg, in a couple weeks here.
Yes, I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Okay, mine is a podcast, not this one, but you should.
What?
But this one.
Well, this one hasn't been published yet, so
exactly.
she can get away with it.
There you go.
Okay.
So Tyler Stanton wrote Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools, but he's also a lead pastor at a church in Oregon, I think, that I don't remember the name of, but I will certainly link it in the show notes because he is currently in a series on Ruth, and it's a lot about suffering and a biblical perspective on suffering. And it's, I think ultimately it will be 5 parts. I've listened to the first 2 and they are just so excellent. I had several like existential aha moments while listening, and maybe not everybody will, but they're phenomenal. So I highly recommend that sermon series.
Great.
Well, this has been just a spectacular conversation. I think one of my favorite Church Chat episodes to date. I love all of them. So if you're listening and you've been a guest, I love you, and your podcast was excellent too. But this one was such a joy. Thank you so much for being on here, Greg. Looking forward to really looking forward to the next time we get to connect. And so for now, we don't have a fancy way to say goodbye. So we'll just say, see you next time.
Bye.
The Church Head Podcast is for educational purposes only. We dive deep into important and sometimes sensitive conversations and topics about life in ministry. Please know that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely the views and the opinions of the guests and the hosts, and do not necessarily represent the organizations that we work for. Nor should our views or opinions be considered a full perspective of circumstances that may be mentioned in this podcast. Our perspectives are limited, and so will be this podcast. What we hope to do is have conversations and spark greater conversations that will lead leaders and their organizations towards greater health. The Church Chat Podcast is edited by Emily Gardner and produced by Emily Gardner and Josh Ott. The Church Chat Podcast is supported by EFCA East, an Eastern District of the Evangelical Free Church of America, covering 6 states. EFCA East helps leaders live well, lead well, and multiply, helping churches find new vitality and multiply transformational churches on the East Coast. The EFCA is multiplying transformational churches among all people. For more information, visit efcaeast.com. We hope you enjoyed this podcast and can't wait to see you on the next Church Chat.